much for joining us on the Sisterhood Coalition. Through the month of September, we are focusing on diving into the topic of unshakable faith and what that looks like to hold on to God when we're walking through times in our lives that seem uncertain, and when we're experiencing fear and anxiety. What does that look like to hold on to God with a faith that is unmovable? First and foremost, I'm Liz, and this is my dear friend Mandy.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming and doing this. Mandy is going to share a little bit about her story with us today and just her faith journey as she's gone through some stuff in her life. So I guess let's start out with you telling us a little bit about you, and then tell us more of your faith journey.
Okay. So I grew up in a Christian home. And just in the church, my parents very involved. And then when I became a teenager, I kind of rebelled a little bit and found myself a teen mom at 17. Shortly after that, a single mom. And so that was just a whole lot of identity kind of realization, going from being this good little Christian girl to then, teen mom, single. So I actually stepped away from the church for 2 or 3 years, just because I felt a lot of judgment, and I think a lot of that was also myself too. And then I moved to Colorado from California and found a church that I loved, and I quickly got involved, and through that ministry I ended up meeting my husband. And so we got married in August of 2014. And by that point, my son that I had, he was 7. And so we got married, and a year later, we got pregnant with our daughter, Ember. And everything went well. Like, it was a normal pregnancy. Everything was smooth. It was a really fun time, lots of excitement. And we went in at our 37-week checkup, and we got the news that she had actually passed away. And so we were told that we were going to have to deliver her, be induced and deliver her and bring her body into the world. And so that was really, really hard. That was very painful. It was something that we just didn't expect, kind of came out of the blue. So we had her on May 13th of 2016. We got to spend a little bit of time with her before we had to say our goodbyes. And then after that, planning her memorial, and we lost our apartment like right that same time. So we moved in with my parents, which was a blessing that we had the option. Not ideal for a newly married couple, going through a whole lot of emotional stuff, and definitely wrestling with God a lot, because you just ask yourself, why? Like, why does this happen? And so, I don't know. So after that, like, we've struggled some with financial and job situations. It's just been an up and down roller coaster since 2016. But in 2018, we actually had our son, our little rainbow baby, and that was a journey in itself, because, being pregnant again after losing a baby, especially so late, there's a lot of anxiety around that, lots of praying, lots of leaning into God, and just asking him to kind of just take it and take the situation and just trust that everything's going to be okay. And thankfully, he was just fine. And he's 2 years old now. And since then, we've still continued to struggle with job stuff. And it's just, I feel like we're always on this constant roller coaster of ups and downs. But we just keep leaning into God through all the highs and lows in every single season. So
let's talk about, so after you guys had lost Ember, what were some scriptural truths that helped carry you through that, and how was God faithful to you during that time? Where, you know, how did you see God the most during that time showing up?
Yeah, so I would say it honestly probably started when we were in the process of delivering her. So when they induced me, we ended up I was in labor for 33 hours with her. And during that time, we had somebody had set up a GoFundMe page for us. And so then we had so many people who just came and supported us financially, which was one less thing to kind of take off of our minds so that we could focus on our healing and our next steps. So God provided in that through community, even just in her birth, like he was in all of the details, even though it was such a painful and heartbreaking moment. He still showed himself through all of that. And so the details that we picked up on pretty quickly were, I was in labor for 33 hours. She was born 3 weeks early. She, now I'm spacing. She was born on the 13th of May. And, there's a bunch of threes everywhere in all of her story. And I had a friend who later texted me. I think I was even still in the hospital. I think it was definitely after she was born. And I was just kind of in recovery and all of that. And she had looked up the numbers 3 and 33 and things like that. And that number 3 is tied to, biblically, the number of completion is basically what it's called. And so, and wholeness was another one. And so I think for us, we took that as her journey was kind of complete, but she was also whole, and that she was now in heaven, and she didn't have to experience all the heartbreak and all the pain and things of this world that we have to deal with. So we found some solace in that, but it definitely was still really difficult. And so for a long time, I had a hard time talking to God. Like, I just didn't have the words. I didn't know what to say. It was you're just so raw, and you're just kind of broken down, and there are no perfect words.
Yeah.
There is, and in our own understanding, we don't understand why things like this happen.
Yeah.
We later found out that she had a cord accident, and that was the cause of it, which was just a fluke. Like, it was something that no one could have prevented. And so during that time of me not knowing how to talk to God, I came across a scripture that just really made sense to me. It gave me a whole lot of just comfort, and that's Romans 8:26. And that says, "In the same way the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans." And I think that phrase, wordless groans, was so important to me. It still is. Still now, I'm like, that's exactly how I feel about a lot of, about losing Ember and other things that we've had to go through in our lives. You just don't have the words for it. And you just, knowing that the Spirit will speak for you, and that you don't have to come to God in a prayer and have something laid out and planned of something to say, and that the Spirit knows what you need.
Yeah.
And the Spirit is there for you. And all you have to do is just kind of let him speak for you. So that kind of became my life verse, for sure.
What was really cool about that verse is in verse 27, it says, "And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a big, bold thing there, because this is not just the Spirit interceding for anybody who goes through this. This is a promise and God gives us for God's people, for us. That's like our inheritance as God's people, you know. These are the promises that we can hang on to that are in his scriptural truth. And I think we overlook that a lot of times. So that's so much.
Well, and then the verse after that is the one that is most well known, 8:28. And that's he'll work all things together for his good. Yeah. But I think it's so important to also read it in context and read those two verses prior to that one.
And it's not God works all things together for good for just anybody. It's for those who love God. Right. Is what it talks about. It's like for those who love God, for God's people. These are our promises. They're not promises for unbelievers, which is why this is all the more reason to lean into God when you're going through tragedy and heartbreak and anxiety and fear and all of this stuff. It's why it's so important to lean into God if you don't know him, because like these are your truths. This becomes your truth if you are part of God's kingdom. If you become a believer, like that becomes your reality.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. You own it.
Yes.
You're like, oh, this actually applies to me.
This is for me.
Yes. Exactly. Well, and that's what's beautiful about God's word is that it is living and breathing, and it's always changing, you know, as far as like different chapters of our lives and what seasons we're in. A verse can mean something to us one season, and then in another season, it has a whole new meaning. And I love that it is so adaptable to your own life like that.
Yeah. Do you have any more verses, or do you want to skip on to?
I have a few, just mostly because, I mean, especially with us, with our financial struggles that we have dealt with over the years. I'm just going to pull them out because, of course, I don't have it like ready. So Isaiah 40:31, it's another very well-known one, and that is, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. I actually have this verse on a big, huge thing that I got at like Hobby Lobby in my living room. And I read it every single day because it is so important. And it's to know that, you know, he's helping us. He's sustaining us in our journey. And he's helping us to not grow weary and to have that strength, and that even when we feel depleted, if we tap into him and we talk to God, he can bolster us up and help us to be able to take on the next thing that hits us. It's not that we have to take on this whole life or a massive mountain. It's just what's the next thing that we're needing to do, and to invite him into that space to actually come and help you in that moment. My other one is another very well-known one, and that is Jeremiah 29:11. I have this one in my bedroom, and that one is, hold up. There we go. For some reason, it went to the other one. Okay. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And that one I have in our room because, you know, we've struggled with jobs for my husband mostly, and we've just ran into issues after issues. And the most recent one, he lost his job because of COVID, cutbacks and things like that. And so we just feel it's a lot like we just don't understand what God's plan is and his purpose, and why we're constantly going through trial after trial. It's exhausting, you know. And so reading that verse, knowing that he has a plan that is going to prosper us, that it is not for our demise, it is not that he's, you know, a little kid with a magnifying glass over an ant or anything like that. Like, he's not like, oh, how much can we make them squirm? It's more like he has a plan, and we can't see that whole plan right now. Like, in our own understanding, we don't know why everything happens. And I think a person in the Bible that is a really important one to relate to in that way is Joseph. Because Joseph, I mean, he was about 17 when he had that dream that he was going to be, that his brothers and his father and everybody was going to be bowing down before him, right? And of course, he was a young kid and told everybody and boasted about it. And his brothers, who already had issues with him, like, they threw him in a pit. They were going to kill him. And then Reuben spoke up and was like, oh, no, don't do that. And then they went and sold him
As a slave.
yeah, to the Midianites. And then he is sold to Potiphar. And then he goes through that whole thing with Potiphar's wife. It's just like, and then he's imprisoned. And he's in prison for a while. And then one time there's a cupbearer who's in the jail cell. And he speaks up for him, and the cupbearer was like, I'm going to remember you when I talk to Pharaoh. And then he forgot about him for 2 years. So it's from that dream until when the cupbearer finally remembered him and told Pharaoh about him.
It was God brings him into a position of power.
Yeah, but it took 22 years.
Yes.
Like 22 years. And so you put things into that kind of perspective. Like, you can look at that chunk of time in Joseph's life and just be like, man, like, that was rough. But the end result, which everything led to it, and God designed it that way so that God could be glorified in every bit of his story. It's just, I think it's important to know that your life can also have that same kind of a story. Like, it's not just left for the people in the Bible. Like, God is still working, and he's working in us.
Right. I love when he says to his brothers, when he finally confronts his brothers, and he says, what you intended for evil, God intended for good.
Yes.
And I think there's so many situations like that in a lot of people's lives where you just experience devastating circumstances, and whether that's, somebody else did something to you, or you were a victim of some sort, where it's like somebody intended evil for you, but God can still create beauty from the ashes, and he can still create good from our darkest hours and our darkest places and our deepest pain.
Yes.
And I love that. It's like woven throughout the Bible in so many stories, but I love that so much. Let's close up here with if you knew somebody who was walking through a similar situation, what would you say to encourage them to keep their faith and to keep holding on to God?
I think for me, it's honestly like, look for God in the details, like where, like actually seek them out. Like, don't just kind of go through the motions and blind yourself by being so overwhelmed by whatever is happening in your life or being all consumed by it. Like, take a breath and try to see if you can find those little moments, because I truly believe that God whispers to us in those little moments. So in regards to grief, for me with Ember, the numbers that are all around her birth and her story, the 3, we see those everywhere we go. Like, my husband and I, and even our oldest son, we're always seeing like 33 or 3 or 13, and we see those numbers everywhere, and it tends to be when we need it the most. Another thing is, when I was pregnant with Ember, we had ladybugs that would just follow me everywhere. I mean, like, when there shouldn't have been ladybugs in the winter, right? And I would get a ladybug on me, and I'm like, oh, that's random, okay. And then after she passed, we just have continued over the past 4 years been seeing ladybugs, and it's usually around it's usually like when we're struggling the most. So like when we just need that extra little boost of encouragement, and to know that we take it as she's saying hi, and it's God letting her say hi to us, and it's like little kisses from heaven for us. So we find him in the details there, in our finances that we've had to struggle with. We've found God through the people in our lives, like through our support system, the church body, which when I walked away from the church for a few years, it was because I had some issues with the church body. Like I like I said before, a lot of it was also like my own identity crisis and like trying to wrap my head around, this is my life now as a single mom. But since I came back to church, I've really tried to lean into the people that God has brought in my life, because they're there for a reason. Like, it's not that they're just some random person or whatever. Like, there's a purpose. Absolutely. And as we've gone through financial struggles, and there's a Bible study that I lead, and a lot of the other leaders have been so incredibly supportive, like whether that's through prayer, whether that's through financial support, whether that's through finding a job posting and sending it my way, like all those other little things. And so I think giving credit where credit is due, and giving God credit for those things, because he's laying it on people's hearts to actually think of David and I, and think of our situation, and to want to help however they can. So we're just so thankful for that. So I think overall, like, just hold on and know that even when it feels very hopeless, God is there. God is watching you. You just have to it's that be still and know, like, just be still and know that he is there. He is loving you through it, and that there is ultimately going to be a plan. Like, it's all part of this plan, and we just can't see it yet.
Absolutely. So, gosh, thanks so much for sharing.
And
just for sharing your heart with us, and sharing Ember's story. I know your strength and your faith has been an inspiration to me, and I know to many other people, and it's going to continue to be so as you continue to share with others. So just thank you.
Thank you for letting me be here and to share.
I appreciate it so much, and thank you so much for watching and joining us. Please be sure to check in with us throughout the month of September. We're going to have a lot of really great content this month around this topic of unshakable faith. And if you haven't yet, please be sure to like and subscribe. God bless.
Bye.